The snow came down in sheets that morning, thick and silent, coating the world in white. Pine Hollow, a quiet mountain town in northern Vermont, was still half asleep, its rooftops blanketed, its narrow roads slick with ice. Smoke curled from chimneys, and pine trees groaned gently under the weight of winter. It was 7:04 a.m., 15 degrees below zero. And Ethan Graves was already on his second cup of black coffee. He lived alone in a cabin at the edge of the woods, a modest, weather-worn place built by his own hands. After retiring from the military and losing his wife just 2 years later, solitude had become both a sanctuary and a sentence. Ethan didn't talk much, didn't smile much either, but he was steady, still strong in his mid-40s, with salt and pepper stubble, a soldier's posture, and a silence that carried weight. That morning, he'd driven into town early to pick up kerosene and bread. He parked near the back of the old cafe, a brick building with frost-lined windows and a sagging awning. The place hadn't been properly open in months, but locals still used the alley for shortcuts or smoke breaks. Ethan was used to the quiet here. But today, something wasn't right. As he stepped out of the truck, snow crunching under his boots, he heard it, a faint whine. Ragged and desperate. Not the wind, not a machine, something alive. He turned toward the sound, stepping carefully past the snowdrift toward the dumpsters behind the cafe. And there, curled in a dark patch of slush and ice, was a dog, a German shepherd, from the looks of it. Male, muzzle streaked with blood. One paw tucked under his chest, the other stretched out at an unnatural angle. His side rose and fell rapidly, labored and uneven. Ethan crouched. "Hey, boy." The dog lifted his head just slightly, eyes locking onto Ethan's. There was no growl, no bark, just a steady, intelligent stare, cautious, but not afraid. Eyes that had seen things. Eyes that held shadows. Ethan's throat tightened, not because of the cold. The sight of the wounded animal triggered something buried deep, memories of field tents in Afghanistan. Men screaming on stretchers, blood-staining desert sand. He had seen eyes like that before. On soldiers. On himself. "You're not dying here," Ethan muttered, already shrugging off his coat. Moving slowly, he wrapped the dog in it, careful of the injured leg. The animal whimpered but didn't resist. He was freezing, exhausted, done running. Ethan lifted him gently, arms tense from the weight and awkward angle. The shepherd was heavier than he looked, muscle under the grime, but Ethan carried him like he'd carried wounded men before, fast, focused, unflinching. The only vet in Pine Hollow was on Main Street, a little cedar-sided clinic with a blue-painted door and hand-drawn posters in the window. It belonged to Lila Bennett, a woman known around town for her blunt honesty, calm hands, and refusal to give up on any animal. Ethan kicked the door with his boot. Lila opened it moments later, already pulling on gloves. "Whoa, what happened?" "Found him behind the cafe. He's bleeding. Paw's bad. Cold's worse." She stepped aside. "Bring him in." The clinic was small but warm, smelling of antiseptic and pine cleaner. Ethan laid the dog on the examination table. Lila moved fast, checking vitals, assessing wounds, cutting away matted fur. The shepherd didn't fight, just lay still, eyes occasionally flicking to Ethan. "No tag," Lila said, frowning. "No collar. He's chipped." Ethan shook his head. "Didn't scan anything." She nodded. "We'll patch him up. Internal bleeding's not likely. He's lucky. If you hadn't found him, I couldn't leave him there." Lila glanced at him. "I didn't say you could." There was a moment of quiet between them. She stitched a gash along the dog's side, while Ethan stood still, arms crossed, watching every movement. When the worst was over, Lila stepped back, removing her gloves. "He's stable. We'll monitor him today. Check for infection. Then, well, unless someone steps forward, he's yours." Ethan blinked. "What? You brought him in. He trusts you. And we both know no one's coming for him." He looked at the shepherd again. The dog was resting now, head turned slightly toward him, eyes half open, watching, waiting. Ethan nodded once. "I'll take him. Got a name in mind?" Ethan paused. "Shadow." Lila tilted her head. "Because of his coat?" "No," Ethan said quietly. "Because of his eyes." That night, Shadow slept curled beside Ethan's fireplace, bandaged and drowsy, but alive. He didn't make a sound, just watched Ethan from the corner of the room, as if memorizing every shape, every movement. Ethan sat in his chair, a book in his lap he wasn't reading. He looked at Shadow, then out the window at the snow still falling, blanketing the forest in silence. For the first time in years, something stirred in the cabin besides old memories. Something like connection, something like beginning again. The days that followed were filled with stillness, but not silence. Snow blanketed Pine Hollow in heavy drifts, muffling the world outside Ethan's cabin. Inside, though, a quiet transformation had begun. Shadow, the wounded German shepherd rescued from behind the cafe dumpster, was no longer just surviving. He was healing. Lila Bennett visited the cabin each morning, a thermos of coffee in one hand, a medical kit in the other. She checked the dressings on Shadow's flank, monitored his appetite, and adjusted his pain medication with the same calm precision Ethan had come to respect. On the fifth day, Lila arrived with a different expression. "I ran his paw print through a working dog registry," she said, sitting down by the fire where Shadow now lay curled on a warm quilt. "It came back." Ethan looked up from his chair. "You're serious?" "Yeah." She pulled a folded page from her coat and handed it over. "Meet K91137. Call sign, Dagger, assigned to the New York State Police. He was a search and rescue dog and tactical support. Trained in scent detection, pursuit, and high-risk entry." Ethan stared at the file. A younger version of Shadow stared back from a black and white ID photo, alert, strong, with the same fierce amber eyes. But the coat was cleaner, the body unscarred. Lila continued. "He went missing over 9 months ago during a raid. A task force was intercepting a wildlife trafficking ring near the Catskills. Gunfire broke out. 2 officers injured. Dagger disappeared during the chaos. They listed him as Kia, killed in action. But now, he wasn't killed, Ethan murmured. He was taken. Lila nodded grimly. Based on the old wounds I've been treating, burns, pressure point damage, jagged scarring, I'd say he wasn't just abandoned. He was used, trained again, for something darker. Ethan's hands tightened around the folder. Dogfighting, possibly, or guard work in the black market trade. Either way, someone broke him, and he still found a way to escape. They both looked at Shadow. He was awake, ears twitching, eyes tracking their voices but not moving to intervene. He never barked, never whimpered. He watched everything in silence. Alert yet contained, like a soldier in a place that didn't trust peace. Ethan exhaled slowly. He wasn't just thrown away. He was made into something he never wanted to be. And now no one's looking for him. Lila stood. They're not. He's not property anymore. According to their registry, he's off the grid. Ethan looked at her. Then he stays with me. A pause. She nodded. I figured you'd say that. Each morning after that, Ethan and Shadow walked the snow-packed trails behind the cabin. The first few times, Shadow kept close, steps tight and defensive, head down, but gradually, his pace loosened. He began to sniff trees, pause at frozen tracks, even look up at birds fluttering through the pine branches. Ethan rarely spoke, but when he did, it was gentle, encouraging. He told Shadow stories, fragments from his time overseas. About the desert, the sirens, the noise, about the brothers he lost, and the long silence afterward. He didn't talk about his wife. Not yet. That was still a wound of another kind. But Shadow listened, not just with ears, but with the stillness of someone who knew what it meant to carry pain with no one to tell. At night, Shadow slept near the fire, his breathing steady. Ethan would watch him, thinking of the times he woke alone, sweat-soaked, after dreams he didn't want. Those nights were quieter now. Shadow's presence wasn't a cure, but it was a reason to stay grounded. To get up in the morning. To keep routine. One evening, as a blizzard rolled in and coated the cabin windows with frost, Ethan sat with Lila at the kitchen table. She'd stopped by after closing the clinic, bringing soup in a thermos and updates about a local coyote sighting. They talked about Shadow, about trauma, about how recovery isn't linear, in dogs or humans. You know what I see when I look at you too, she said finally. Her voice soft. Ethan looked up, raising a brow. Two soldiers who weren't given a chance to put the war down. But now, maybe, you're giving each other that chance. Ethan glanced at Shadow, who lay at his feet, tail curled tightly, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. He reached down and ran his hand through the dog's thick fur. Shadow blinked but didn't move, a sign of trust that hadn't come easy. I don't know if I'm saving him, Ethan said. Sometimes I think he's the one pulling me back. Lila gave a faint smile. Does it matter who's saving who? They fell into silence again. The good kind. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the cabin, warmth spread, not just from the fire, but from something less visible, something shared. Two beings, both wounded, both learning to breathe again. And beneath the weight of snow and silence, something new began to grow, slow, steady, and real. The snow had softened in Pine Hollow, but the cold remained sharp, biting through coats and boots alike. It was early afternoon when Shadow, now stronger and more alert than ever, began acting strangely. He had been napping on the floor of the vet clinic, curled up by the front desk, when his ears twitched at something outside. Ethan noticed it first, the way Shadow suddenly stood, stiff-backed and focused, his nose tilted toward the back of the building. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, rising from the bench. Shadow let out a low, guttural growl, the first sound he'd made since arriving in Pine Hollow. He moved quickly, almost with urgency, padding down the hall and pushing open the back door with his shoulder. Snow crunched beneath his paws as he bolted toward a small, forgotten structure at the rear of the lot, the old municipal storage shed. Ethan followed close behind, heart thudding. The building had stood there for years, barely used, supposedly a storage site for leftover town supplies, folding chairs, old street signs, and such. It had always been locked, and no one had ever questioned it. Shadow stopped at the rusted door and began scratching violently, pawing at the lock, barking now, sharp and agitated. This wasn't random behavior, this was memory. Ethan tried the door. It didn't budge, but above the handle was a small metal latch, a place for a padlock that had, at some point, been hastily removed. He stepped back and shouldered the door once. Nothing. Twice. On the third hit, the latch cracked and the door groaned open. The smell hit them first. Rotting cardboard, wet dog, chemical tang. Inside, the air was thick with dust and dampness. Ethan reached for the flashlight he always kept clipped to his belt and switched it on. What the beam revealed made his stomach tighten. Wooden crates, stacked and nailed shut. Several had already been pried open. Inside were unlabeled vials, clear bags of white powder, syringes, and dog muzzles. Spiked collars, training poles stained with old blood. In the corner was a steel cage, bent and rusting, big enough for a full-grown dog. Next to it, a notebook, damp but still legible. Ethan stepped forward, flipping through it with a practiced eye. The writing was crude but structured. Dates, weights, drug dosages, names of dogs, names of buyers, codes. One entry stopped him cold. K91137 transferred. No resistance. Progressing to aggression stage. Strong but needs breaking. High resale value. His jaw clenched. That was Shadow. He turned slowly. Shadow was now pacing, low to the ground, growling as if the scent itself was a trigger. He sniffed the cage once, then turned sharply toward the doorway. Lila had arrived, breath fogging in the air. "What the hell is this?" she asked, stepping inside. "Why is this here?" Ethan handed her the notebook. As she skimmed the pages, her expression changed, from confusion to revulsion, then shock. "This is a fighting ring," she whispered. "A trafficking pipeline, illegal drugs, dog training, all run from this town." Ethan nodded grimly. "And it wasn't abandoned. This isn't old. These dates are recent. Lila's mind raced. There's only one person who ever asked to keep the spare key to this shed. Said it was for public property oversight when I took over the clinic building. I didn't question it. Ethan looked at her. Who? She stared at him, a sick certainty forming in her chest. Mayor Charles Whitmore. Of course. It made too much sense. Whitmore, the charming, handshaking politician always preaching about revitalizing Pine Hollow. The man with access to every corner of town and the resources to keep things quiet. The same man who had downplayed the earlier busts related to animal smuggling in the county. The same man who, now that she thought about it, had once attended a fundraiser for retired police dogs and insisted on shaking every paw, including Shadow's. Shadow's behavior shifted again. He turned from the cage and trotted back toward the open door. His nose to the ground. Tracking the scent trail. He remembers him, Ethan said. He knows it's Charles. Lila stood in stunned silence, gripping the notebook. We have to report this. Ethan's voice was low, steady. To who? The town council, local police, they all work under him. She bit her lip, mind spinning. We'll take this higher, she said finally. State level, the authorities who can't be bribed or silenced. And we'll keep Shadow safe. If they learn he escaped this, that he knows, they'll want him gone. Ethan nodded. Then we don't let him out of our sight. They secured the shed as best they could and returned to the clinic. Ethan took photos of every crate, every vial, every note. Lila called a contact at a regional wildlife task force she'd once volunteered with, discreetly. Carefully, they would come, quietly, but soon. As the sky darkened over Pine Hollow, Ethan sat in his cabin once more. Shadow curled beside him, no longer just a stray, no longer just a survivor. Now, he was the key to a truth long buried. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt that old part of himself, the soldier, the protector, awaken again. Not for a battlefield, but for justice. The town hall of Pine Hollow hadn't been this full in years. Snow-laced boots stomped the floors. Heavy coats rustled, and murmurs filled the narrow room as residents packed shoulder to shoulder. Drawn by urgency and whispers of scandal. At the front, beneath the faded town seal, stood Mayor Charles Whitmore, composed, rehearsed, and, for the first time in a long while, visibly tense. Behind him, a slideshow of documents flickered on a screen, grainy images of seized contraband. A screenshot of a ledger, all cherry-picked to shape a single, damning narrative. Charles cleared his throat. We're here today because a dangerous animal, found wandering town property, has sparked rumors that threaten the safety and reputation of Pine Hollow. Let me be clear. This German Shepherd, known as Shadow, has a violent background. The notes recovered suggest aggressive training, exposure to narcotics, and possible involvement in illegal activity. This animal is unstable, and by protocol, he should be euthanized. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few faces turned toward Ethan. Seated in the back, jaw clenched, one hand resting on Shadow's broad back. The dog lay calmly at his feet. ears flicking at the commotion but otherwise still, composed in a way that sharply contradicted the claims being made. Ethan stood slowly but remained silent. He was waiting. Charles continued, voice louder now, trying to ride the wave of his own rhetoric. We can't risk public safety based on sentiment. Rehabilitation is costly, risky, and unproven in cases like this. Just as he reached for his next slide, a small voice interrupted. That's not true. All heads turned. At the center aisle stood Ella, Lila's 8-year-old daughter, clutching a thick scrapbook wrapped in red yarn. Her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes didn't waver. My mom doesn't know I brought this, she said, walking to the front. But someone has to show the truth. The mayor blinked, caught off guard. Miss, this isn't appropriate. Ella ignored him. She set the book on the podium and opened it. Photo after photo filled the pages, printed on glossy paper. Labeled in careful handwriting. This is Shadow the day he came to our clinic. He couldn't even walk. Another page. This is Shadow after 2 weeks. I gave him warm blankets. And he never barked once. More photos. Here he is playing with my stuffed bear. And here he is sleeping under the Christmas tree. He's not dangerous. He's scared. And he's kind. He lets me pet his ears. And he doesn't growl. Not even when he's hurt. Silence blanketed the room. Ethan watched, eyes damp. Shadow, beside him, tilted his head slightly, as if understanding he was being defended. Then, from the side door, another voice rang out. I can confirm that identification. A man in uniform stepped forward, flashing a badge. Detective Ramon Alvarez, NYPD K9 Unit. I flew in this morning after receiving documentation from Dr. Bennett and Mr. Graves. He walked forward, holding a file. K91137, registered call sign Dagger, went missing during a multi-agency raid targeting a wildlife smuggling network. We never recovered him, but we did recover reports that he was sold into a trafficking ring specializing in turning service animals into fighting dogs. Shadow is Dagger. His microchip data, scars, and behavior patterns all confirm it. And if you still doubt it, he whistled a single sharp note. Shadow immediately sat up. Eyes locked on the officer. At a second command, given in German, he stood, then lay back down, all without hesitation. This dog was broken by criminals, Alvarez said firmly, but he is not dangerous by nature. He's a victim, and a damn good one. A wave of murmurs swept through the room again, but this time they carried doubt. Toward Charles. Someone whispered, "If the dog's from New York, what was he doing in our shed?" Another, "Wasn't the mayor the one who had access to that storage?" Charles's face tightened. He opened his mouth to counter. But Ethan stepped forward. "I've served 20 years," he said, voice calm but firm. "I've seen men come back from hell worse than this dog's known. You don't throw them away. You help them stand again." He placed his hand on Shadow's head. "I'll take responsibility. I'll go through every legal step. I'll pay for retraining, evaluations, whatever it takes. I'll even move if that's what's required. But he's not being put down. Not while I'm breathing." Applause broke out, hesitant at first. Then louder. Lila stood near the back, arms around Ella, smiling through tears. Charles looked out over the crowd, a sea of people he'd once counted on, now watching him with suspicion. The story had changed, and he was losing the room. Later that evening, the emergency order was quietly revoked. The state investigators began probing the warehouse. And in the quiet warmth of the cabin, Shadow curled beside Ethan's feet once more, resting easy, not because he was safe, but because someone had finally fought for him. Spring crept gently into Pine Hollow, melting the last patches of snow and softening the world into greens and browns. The mountain air carried the scent of pine needles and damp soil. With it came a sense of quiet renewal, not just for the land, but for the people who called it home. At the heart of this renewal stood a small cabin-turned-center near the tree line. Its wooden walls newly painted, a wide porch added, and a hand-carved sign above the entrance, the Hollow Haven. Inside, children's laughter mixed with birdsong, and the occasional bark, deep, steady, familiar. Shadow padded through the hallway like a silent guardian, tail flicking calmly as he moved between rooms filled with sunlight, blankets, drawings, and the low murmur of healing conversations. He was stronger now, his coat thick, his gait confident. Scars still marked his side, but they no longer defined him. What had once been a broken fighter was now a companion, a presence, a healer in his own quiet way. Shadow had become a central figure at the center, especially with the children. Many of them were trauma survivors, kids who had lost parents, escaped abuse, or lived through unspeakable things their mouths couldn't yet name. But when they were with Shadow, they didn't need to speak. He would simply sit with them, lay his head in their lap, let them cry without judgment. And they trusted him, because he knew what it was to be afraid and still come back. Ethan watched it all unfold slowly, not from a distance, but from within. He had helped build this place, brick by brick, idea by idea, alongside Lila and her daughter Ella. What began as a recovery project for one injured dog had grown into something none of them could have imagined, a hybrid sanctuary for both children and veterans, where trauma wasn't hidden, but faced, where pain wasn't rushed away, but held gently. Lila ran the medical and emotional therapy programs. Ella, now the unofficial mascot of the center, helped design the playroom and walk the dogs. And Ethan, he became the mentor for the older kids. The ones who needed quiet over questions. The ones who flinched at loud noises and didn't know how to sleep through the night. Veterans, too, began to visit. Some came just to sit by the fire and listen. Others helped with repairs, guided nature walks, or joined group talks in the evenings. Everyone had something broken, but here, broken didn't mean unwanted. One child stood out. His name was Micah, 7 years old. Thin as a matchstick, with sunken eyes and a silence that wrapped around him like armor. He hadn't spoken a word since arriving months ago. Not to staff, not to other kids, not even to Ella, who had a gift for getting the shy ones to come out of their shells. But he watched Shadow, every day, Without fail, Micah would sit across from him, just out of reach, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. He never said a word, but his eyes said plenty. One morning, as Ethan was chopping wood out back, Ella came running, breathless. "Come quick, he's talking to Shadow." Ethan dropped the axe. Inside, he found Micah crouched on the floor, one hand resting on Shadow's neck. The dog lay still, eyes half closed, tail tapping the floor slowly. Micah's voice was barely a whisper. "Horse from disuse. I know you're not scary," the boy said, his hand trembling slightly. "You're just like me." Shadow nudged closer, resting his nose against Micah's chest. "I saw it happen. I saw the fire, and then no one said anything. But you don't ask." Ethan stood at the doorway, unmoving, heart tight in his chest. Micah leaned closer, his arms wrapping around Shadow's neck. "You came back, so maybe I can too." That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees and stars began to appear, Ethan sat on the porch beside Shadow, a steaming cup of tea in his hand. The light from the windows behind them cast a warm glow across the snowy clearing. He looked down at the dog whose eyes once held nothing but shadows. Now, they held something else. Hope. "You saved him," Ethan murmured, "just like you saved me." Shadow rested his head on Ethan's boot, letting out a slow, contented sigh. Ethan thought back to the alley behind the cafe, to the dog curled in the snow, bleeding and silent, to the part of himself that had once been just as lost. He hadn't known it then, but that cold, desperate moment was the beginning of something far bigger. Not just healing, but purpose. The Hollow Haven was more than a center now. It was a home, a place where old souls, canine, human, and everything in between, could find each other in the quiet and begin again. And at the heart of it all, a once-forgotten dog named Shadow stood as the proof that even in darkness, a second life is always possible. Would you like help compiling this story into a formatted short story or digital booklet?
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.